All right, I believe we're live. Welcome everyone here to the Thriving Marriage podcast. What today we're talking about is your spouse addicted to divorce. And I'm Heather Choate, back in the studio, I guess, with Marc Johnston. It's been a little while. How's it going, Marc?
It's going all right. Yeah, I want to say it's like been a good solid month plus some before since we've both been here together.
Yeah, so excited to be doing this again with you guys. And before we go into the signs that your spouse might be addicted to divorce, and above all, what you shouldn't do, what you should do, we're going to share our client win of the week. And this one came as a comment to one of our posts. And this client is anonymous, but they say, "Thank you. I went through your program 2 years ago. My husband was done with our marriage, but we are still together and stronger than ever." And I love this because, Marc, you and I have been doing this a long time. And sometimes we have clients that are like, it was 2 years ago that we were on the verge of divorce. And now we're coming back to let you know a couple of years later that things are going really good. We're still together, stronger than ever, which is awesome. That's exactly what we want to see for all of our clients, to progress like that.
Yeah, I'm reminded, I want to say it was last week where we were sharing another win, and they were sharing this experience that having gone through our program where, it took about 6 months in the program to start turning things around. And so I'm reminded a little bit of that. Like, here's this person saying, yeah, like 2 years ago, I went through this and we're going strong. Or in this other case, it took 6 months to really start turning things around. And I really appreciate the effort that and the dedication that a lot of our clients are showing up with in these situations, because it can be very hard to keep going and keep working. And we find over and over again that the clients who do have that dedication, that willingness to have a little bit of patience with this, are these ones that keep seeing these wonderful results like this that you just shared today.
Yeah, it is about that consistent effort. And we're going to go a little bit into a commonality that we've been hearing. Like, my spouse just really can't seem to let go of the idea of divorce. I've made all these changes. In fact, here's one, Marc, right, that we get. Like, my spouse even sees all the changes that I've made, and they're happy I've made them all, and they recognize I've made them, but they still want a divorce. So why is that not enough? And so that's what we're going to get to the root of today. Let me know in the comments if you feel like your spouse might be addicted to the idea of divorce. They just can't seem to let it go. All the effort that you're making in the world doesn't seem to move the needle or make them any more willing to work on things with you. If so, let me know in the comments, and we will send you some resources, including this podcast, right? We're going to go deeper into it, but some resources on what you can do to turn things around. And I want to know exactly what's going on in your relationship. So, Marc, I know we want to kind of start with some discussion here. So have you ever felt like you or someone else is stuck when you're trying to discuss solutions, or when they're trying to discuss solutions?
Yeah, I'm thinking about the many experiences that I've had around people facing some divorce. I'm thinking of more of a personal situation, not my own, but someone that I know, and where the wife was having a real hard time because her husband was having these repeated affairs. And having had some conversations with this person, she expressed a lot of frustration. She said, I tried talking about this. We've tried therapy. We've tried all sorts of solutions. In every time there are these promises to do better, and ultimately it just goes back to the way it was. And when it came right down to it, when this person finally decided to divorce, this was some of the sentiment that she expresses. She said, I don't feel like there's any other choice here. And even though her husband objected to the divorce and said, hey, let's try to work this through, let's try to fix this. I mean, to a certain extent, I think that this fits under the category of our, like, the topic of discussion today. Like, we're talking about addicted to divorce. She didn't want to veer away from the solution. And I'm thinking, like, these sort of experiences, it's like when we're talking about like addiction to divorce, it is very much this. It's like one person has their eyes on the solution. I'm going to put it in quotes, the solution of divorce. They say there's nothing else left to me except for this one option. And I think that's a lot of like what this is about. It's this idea of feeling frustrated by other solutions, or feeling stuck, or feeling like there's only one direction left to them now. I don't know, what are you seeing with that, Heather? Have you seen these sort of interactions either in your life in some way?
Definitely, sometimes we feel like we get so fixated on this is the only way to be happy. This is the only thing I can do to get out of the situation.
Mm-hmm.
More often than not, as human nature, we're trying to move away from pain. Sometimes we're trying to move towards pleasure, but we're usually more motivated, according to psychology that I've seen and studied, is that you're usually trying to move away from pain. And so this idea of divorce usually is the way out. Like you mentioned, it's the solution. It's the scapegoat. It's the, that they're just very fixated on that because they see it as that's the only thing that's going to really make this better at this point. And then we talk about the negative narrative, and we'll probably go deeper into that later in the podcast. But what I've also seen is that they become so addicted to their own story. Like, so we all have our own perspective, and they become so entrenched in their story about you as the husband or wife, and the story about the marriage and how they can't be happy here, and how they're, whatever the story is, right? I love you, but I'm not in love with you. You guys are familiar with the stories, right? And they hold on to that story so fast, it starts to become like a mantra, and that's all that they can see. And so what we help you guys do in our coaching and the path process here is to help your spouse to let go of that story, to feel safe enough to let it go, and to want to let it go. Just like the reason why we're using the word addiction, we're going to talk about what addicted to divorce actually means here. But addiction is when you just even maybe know something isn't the best for you, but you just keep going back to it. So either they're making threats of divorce until eventually that's just, the empty threats become the real thing, right? Maybe they're throwing around the D word kind of casually, or maybe it's become so much the only way out that they have a hard time letting it go. And so they become emotionally intoxicated by it, emotionally wrapped up in this idea. And more often than not, when we're talking to you guys, the ones that want to save their marriage, want to turn things around, you're actually the one that's a little more emotionally sober. It's still really challenging for you, but the person that's going through a really, they're way more wrapped up in the emotion of it all is usually your spouse. They're more addicted to that and dealing with all of that.
Yeah, I can see how that would be an addicting sort of sense. Like if they're saying, hey, here's something that gives me some leverage, some power, some ability to feel like I'm moving forward in some way to solve these things that have been frustrating me for so long. And it's hard to veer away from that. Just it's difficult, especially if one has decided that this is the one way. So what do we mean if we really want to clarify what is meant by this addiction to divorce? What are we talking about here?
Yeah. So just to sum it up, like the person initiating the divorce, it seems like one kind of solution, right? The solution that they're fixated on. And it's highly likely that other solutions maybe were explored or considered, but they're not leading them to the same result that they want. So those other solutions in many ways might feel impossible to the person considering divorce, like going to therapy or talking about it or leaving the affair partner. So basically, addiction to divorce means a state where all other solutions are shut out to the point where the only perceived viable way forward is to end the marriage, even when other reasonable solutions are presented. Mark, what do you see? What do we mean by addicted to divorce?
I think just to kind of go off of what you're talking about here, there's a lot of different things that we're describing. If I had to, in every relationship is going to be a bit unique, but if I had to add on to that, I would say these are situations where trust is probably very low within the relationship. They say, I can't trust that things can be different. I can't trust that you're going to make changes. I would also say a lot of people have been bouncing the idea of divorce around in their head for some time. Most of the cases that I see, there have been other solutions tried, and our clients, the people that we're talking to, they're unaware that of how frustrated their partner is getting, and how these other solutions are feeling increasingly frustrating to their partner. I'm thinking of like someone that I've been talking with recently, and his wife is saying, is putting out this complaint here that my client, the husband, has been lying. There's all these lies throughout the relationship on some pretty big decisions. And she says, I've tried addressing this. I've tried talking about this. I've tried telling you that I need you to be more forthcoming, more open. And these lies keep happening. So she keeps putting this trust in the situation and then continually feels hurt. And so for her, she says, I don't see any other viable way forward in order to solve this hurt that I'm experiencing. Basically, I think it's like this is a point where there's a sense of feeling stuck and no other potential solutions or options are there. And that's why the divorce is why they fixate so much on the divorce. I think it's that right there is the key feature, is the sense of stuckness. What do you think, Heather? Is that what this is all about? Is the being stuck?
Yeah, getting fixated on that idea and then not seeing the other options. Exactly. So, Marc, as you're talking about this client and many others that we've worked with, what leads a couple to this point where the spouse is so addicted to the idea of divorce, and why do people really feel stuck?
Good question. I see a lot of times in these cases, the predominant feelings that are present. There's a lot of fear. There's a lot of discomfort. There's a lot of worry around other solutions. To put it into context of another situation that I've been working with, I'm thinking of someone who feels like there's no other way. No other way forward besides divorce. He says that in order to protect his children from another relationship, he needs to move towards divorce. And when other solutions are presented, he says, no, those things aren't going to work. It's the costs become too high, or there's a lot of fear about how those might impact his goal of protecting his kids. So like this is what I predominantly see. It feels stuck because there's so much worry in even just the exploring of these other options, to the point where these other solutions feel just impossible. And this is a concept that gets brought up a lot. It's actually a core piece of our program, a core concept. We talk about this concept of the impossible problem within a relationship. And I would say I cannot think of a single case that we've worked with where this isn't present. This idea that the problems have become so stuck, so impossible, that divorce becomes the only other option. It's the problem that justifies the moving towards divorce. And my thought on this is, like, when someone is feeling stuck, I think the question that's important is, what has prevented the situation from allowing for other solutions? Because I think that's really why things get to this point. I think there's all this exploration of other solutions. Those other solutions are shut down or dismissed or seen as not important or whatever. And so if we're trying to reverse engineer this, I do think it's really important to consider, like, what happened within the relationship that didn't allow for these other solutions to happen. I don't know, Heather, have you seen this sort of thing? Like, thinking about like this sort of process about impossible problems and patterns of behavior within relationships that don't allow for those solutions. Like, what do you see?
Yeah. So it's bringing to my mind a couple that she felt like she had no voice in her marriage. And the only way she could get her husband to like pay any attention or make any change or even like try to work on the relationship was to threaten divorce.
Mhm.
So for her in this instance, it became a major tool to use to have empowerment in the relationship, and that she could get her husband to want to make changes and get his attention. And so for her, in order to give that up, felt like an impossible problem because that was the only avenue that she saw worked with him. She had very low trust, like you said again, in solutions. She had very low trust that if she stopped putting the pressure of divorce on things, that he was going to make any changes, because all these other years when she tried that, it didn't work. Right. So the trust is very low, and she's not seeing that there's any real other option for her to get her needs met. And so she became very fixated on that idea that I need to hold this over his head or I don't have a leg to stand on in my relationship. And in this case, a lot of the contributing things that led up to it was they didn't have the ability to give and receive feedback, right? They didn't have the ability to address issues. They didn't have the ability to meet each other's needs. And so to her, this was the way to get all of that done.
Mm.
And it was scary and hard for her to be willing to see any other option. She thought it was impossible. And so that was the only avenue out for her. And I think that that's one of the major contributors that we see, right, Mark? Some of the common themes is when they are giving feedback, like this client, I don't have a voice here. I don't feel heard. I don't feel like you respect me or consider my opinions or my desires. I don't feel like my needs are being met here. She felt like that feedback had been ignored, right? And that her husband continued to just downplay or dismiss what she was saying. She was not able to communicate in any other way other than kind of this nagging, complaining, critical tone. And so it was really vital. We're going to go into what to do, of course, but that was the hurdle that had to be overcome. We had to show her the impossible problem was not impossible, and that there were solutions when we can learn how to do things in a new way.
Yeah, so I would agree with you there that when feedback isn't handled well, or just it's not flowing very easily, that can be a huge contributor to things feeling stuck, and then the need then to move towards divorce. I think another factor here is, in a lot of cases, there's these repeating cycles, and I think this is a little bit more common with, we think like cycles of addiction, or I would also say in cases where agreements aren't very clear, which is the case often with addictions. If I had to use that specific idea, or that as an example, someone might say, hey, I recognize that my addiction is problematic and that I should stop. And then there's usually a period where there's some better behavior, and then there's some triggers, and the addictive behavior ramps up again. We get into this problematic situation. What I'm talking about in terms of clear agreements is, in essence, this person who has this hypothetical person who has like this addiction problem isn't clearly agreeing to stop the addiction. I mean, they might verbally do that, but there's many things that are preventing them from fully committing to a lot of solutions. And that might sound odd as a way to put it, but what I'm getting at here is whether it's this sort of addictive cycle or whether it's something else. A lot of times these repeated cycles come about from promises of change, subsequent good periods, and then a returning of these problems, and that can feel very frustrating. Very frustrating. It looks like you have something to say there, Heather.
Well, I'm just agreeing. It
Oh,
is frustrating.
yeah. I'm thinking of repeating cycles in relationships in general. I think most every couple has some sort of weak areas, and it can be an amazing thing to work through these long-term struggles with couples. Like, I know my wife Jen and I, we keep having to revisit certain problems within our relationship. Now, luckily, each time we have some discussion and we always come to a good place. And at the same time, it's frustrating to have to retread old ground on occasion. For us, part of what makes our relationship still viable is these repeated problems are generally few and far between. We have a lot more good experiences than poor. And a lot of times, when we come back to these bad spots, we just need a little bit of a nudge in the right direction to get back on track. But I can imagine a lot of scenarios where that isn't the case, where the bad period lasts quite a bit longer, where it takes a lot more effort to get back into those good places. And just the word that keeps coming to my mind over and over again with a lot of these things is frustration. I think that sense of frustration and feeling stuck are very much connected in a lot of these cases. What are your thoughts there on just repeating cycles in relationships? Do you see this around much?
Yeah. And I'd really love to know for you guys, as you're listening to this, tuning in, like, what do you feel like might be some of your repeating cycles? What are the things that you guys just keep stepping back into? Maybe even you've promised that things are going to change, or your spouse has promised things are going to change, but they continue to have this negative behavior, a negative habit, a negative form of communication. And let us know what you guys feel like those are. One of the things that we do with you is we help you identify the patterns that you're in, because we're all in a pattern with our spouse and not all of them are great, right? So it's really important that we learn what the patterns are so that we can interrupt the pattern and create a new, healthy, functional pattern. So encourage you guys to share what you guys feel like might be a repeating cycle in your relationship. We know that if these patterns continue to persist, they lead to that sense of frustration, yes. And then I would say even eventually hopelessness. You feel like you just, no, they're never going to change. Again, that hope factor goes down and down and down the more that we go into these cycles. And the more you have these really negative cycles, the less fulfilling the relationship is. And the less fulfilling it is, the less you're going to be willing and wanting to work on the relationship as well. Marc, what are some of the things that you might hear from your partner if there's been a lot of these repeating cycles?
There's some, after so many years of dealing with similar problems, I almost feel like I can be a bit of a mind reader in some of these cases. Mm-hmm. In other words, there's very predictable statements that come about when certain problems are present. And in this case, there's generally a lot of frustration over promises of change, they keep saying things will be different next time, or they promise me that they're going to be better, and then it's not. Or if it's the other way around, if I have a client who's really trying to make a lot of changes, the other partner saying, you're never going to change. I don't trust that your changes are real. I don't think that what you're doing is genuine. I think it's being manipulative, things like that. It's a lot of this lack of trust. And just to be clear, this is lack of trust in other solutions. We're saying, I have to go to divorce because I can't trust that this solution over here or that solution over there, that it's actually real. And I think that's really at the heart of why some people, even as we try to make changes, get so focused on that divorce. They say, I just don't feel safe opening myself up to more pain, to opening up the possibility, the hope that something over here could actually have some positive impact. And I think that's really that's what is at the heart of these statements that we hear so frequently with this sort of situation. So I think we have a couple main themes, a couple main contributors. We're saying, hey, feedbacks is being ignored. We have a lot of these repeating cycles. I think another major theme is a lack of a sense of safety. If you guys all recall, I was actually talking about safe conversations the other week. And the topic, we were saying, what do you do when your spouse won't talk to you? And I brought up this concept of what I called cave conversations. We like some cutesy little acronyms here and there. So cave conversations, it's curiosity, acceptance, validation, and empathy. And this is always, I hate saying always, it's almost always, there's a lack of these sort of conversations when people are going towards divorce. There isn't this curiosity about why there's problems. There isn't any validation or empathy in people's feelings. And so it becomes like unsafe to be open. It's unsafe to have all that feedback. And I know we were talking about like, okay, there's a lack of feedback, and this is somewhat similar. I'm just kind of talking more specifically about why do a lot of these conversations shut down? Why isn't there conversation about other solutions? And I noticed that these sort of qualities around conversations drop dramatically as the relationship goes closer and closer to divorce. What are your thoughts? Like, is there that connection there, like safety in conversation and viability of solutions? Any thoughts on that, Heather?
Oh, absolutely. And I'm just thinking back in times when my marriage has struggled and like really difficult moments, and the kind of mode that you get into with your spouse when you're not in a healthy functional place and the relationship's not in a healthy functional place goes into all of the dysfunction, right? Into all the blaming, into all the pointing fingers, into lack of accountability, into name calling. It just becomes very, very highly emotionally charged, very defensive. And it's really all about self. If we're going to get down to it, pride, I heard this quote, I'm not going to get it quite right, but pride is really about thinking about who's right, whereas humility is more about what's right. That's from Ezra Taft Benson, if anyone wants to look that up, the exact quote. And that really struck me, because so many times when we're like, who's right? I'm right, you're wrong. I'm valid here. I'm justified. I've been hurt. I have all this pain, right? So therefore, I'm going to go get divorced, or I'm going to have this affair, or I'm going to do this, whatever, right? You completely lost all sense of the curiosity, acceptance, validation, empathy. Mm-hmm. And the times when Ben and I are successful, and we are becoming much more this now, gratefully, where we are curious. Okay, what you just said there kind of stung. I'd like to know where that's coming from, instead of just immediately assuming and pointing the fingers and going into all the dysfunction, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm curious. Okay. And then I'm going to even have some empathy for where you're coming from. I'm going to validate that for you, that's true, and that's where you are. And I'm going to have some acceptance in your beliefs and your differences. And then we can also come in together and have some curiosity about some solutions. What are we both really wanting here? What would we both love to see? What would we love to experience? What needs would you like to have met? What needs would I like to have met? How would we like to have these conversations? Now we can get into some productivity. So just checking in, like in my own experience, and knowing even what the feeling, like the emotional feeling of those two different ways to approach an issue, right? One where you're so caught up in emotion and heat and anger and defensiveness and fear, and it's all about protecting yourself and showing the other person whatever, right? Versus actually genuinely caring and wanting to understand them and wanting to build bridges rather than burn bridges. At least that's the best way it feels to me. So that's the best way I can describe that. And I've seen it true for our clients as well.
Sure. So here are all these things that kind of contribute to it. How do we translate this into some action? Like, I guess we're talking about what, I think you mentioned earlier that we wanted to talk about what not to do, and also like what to do.
What to do. Yeah. So some really big mistakes that you can make when your spouse is wanting out, when they see divorce as the only solution, and they're addicted to divorce, when they're so emotionally intoxicated. Okay. One of the worst things you can do is just to tell them to stop the divorce, tell them to end the affair, tell them to take the divorce off the table completely. I liken that to like a drug addict, right, Mark? So if we know that our good friend is an alcoholic, can we just go to them, or a family member, say it's even a child, right? And go to them and just say, stop drinking. They're going to say, no, go, forget it, get out of here. I'm not going to listen to you. Because to them, drinking is a solution. It's a coping mechanism, and they are attached to that behavior. And so you can't just simply go to them and be like, stop it, right? What they need help. And so if in a similar way, we need to help your spouse, because they are the one that is emotionally intoxicated, and you're the one that's a little more emotionally sober. So you want to make sure that you're not trying to force them to stop the divorce. You're not manipulating them into stopping the divorce, demanding, begging, pleading, all the things we talk about in our push versus pull, right? You guys should be familiar with this if you've listened to us at any time at all, right? And then making sure you also don't just give up yourself. If your daughter was addicted to alcohol and needed help, would you ever just give up on them, right? And how many of us are just giving up on our spouse when they become addicted to a divorce or addicted to their negative story about you? So we want to make sure that we are handling this with care, because right now your spouse is going through something. You're going through something, it's true, but they're going through something, and I almost can say with almost an absolute assurance that it's more than what you're going through. And so having that empathy, having that curiosity, having healthy boundaries, we still have to have healthy boundaries, even with addicted family members, right? But we don't give up on that. What we want to do is create positive solutions that actually work. So pushing for commitment or connection with them too soon is going to backfire. We've said that, I probably said that at least thousands of times. So we want to handle this with care, just like you would with a precious family member that you wanted to help them get well again. You wanted them to see the real you and to connect with who they really are again, rather than this emotional wrapped up story that they've gotten themselves into. So those are some things you want to make sure you absolutely avoid, because they're only going to push your spouse further away and further, potentially even deeper into the addiction. Now, where it gets a little bit of this weird gray area is like making positive changes. Well, sometimes, just like with a drug addict, you can make all these positive changes in your relationship, and that's still not enough for them to want to let go of drinking alcohol. Yeah. So we need to do even a more strategic, proven process than that. Otherwise, they might even see, oh yeah, you're being way nicer to me, and that's nice. I still want to go get a drink. I still want a divorce. So we're going to show you how to handle that in the appropriate way. So Marc, now that I rambled about that, any other thoughts about what not to do?
Sure. I would agree with what you're saying. Like a big thing that what you're mentioning here is like, we can't just tell someone to give up the divorce. It's when the whole reason someone is come to that point where they're saying, yeah, I want a divorce, it's because they don't see any other way. So if you say, let's also remove that, let's remove the one crutch that is holding your life together and gives you some sort of hope that something could be different, you take that away and they're going to be awfully upset. They are not going to like that situation, which seems a bit paradoxical. Like if you're saying, if I don't want to divorce, but I can't tell them that to not divorce. And yes, I understand that that's a very difficult thing to come to and to try and accept. And I think like if we're talking about that as what not to do, I think it's only fair that we have some discussion of like, okay, well, what do we do instead of that, right? I do think that if I want to give like the big overview. I'm going to go off on a slight tangent, and I want to put this into context, because we are telling you all that you can't just take the divorce away as an option. A lot of people come into our program and they are very much willing to work on their relationship. They're saying, okay, I recognize I need to make some changes. And I will say that inevitably, each and every one of these clients that we work with to make these changes, they say, I've made these changes and it's not enough. the other person still says, I need a divorce. And here's where this all connects, is very, very highly likely the person moving towards the divorce, they say, I don't have enough control elsewhere myself to feel like I can have any impact on the relationship. I don't trust that if things were to go bad, that I could put it on the right track. You might have made changes, but I don't feel any control here. How do I know that you are not just going to go back to the way you were? That's the conundrum here. And so if we're putting this in the bigger context, always with our program, we do take this period, this initial period, to establish our clients' changes, and we're looking for this statement of, I can't trust that you've made these changes or that they're genuine. And then that's like a really nice point for us, because then we can start balancing some things out, and we can help to start support. That sounds really grammatically terrible. We can start supporting the sense of the ability to control. That's not even great, to have impact on a relationship. This is what's needed to help someone pull away from this addiction to divorce, is when the partner who wants divorce, when they feel confidence in themselves, when they say, I have some control here, I have some ability to bring about positive solutions without having to resort to divorce. That's the golden moment. We can do a lot of this. There's a lot of different ways we can do this. I mean, we talked about all these things that contribute to the stuckness and a lot of this frustration. I don't know. I feel like there's too much to talk about here, Heather, but like maybe if we talk about maybe a few brief points, like what would be really helpful. What I'm getting at here is we're not having a comprehensive conversation about this because there's too much to discuss, but maybe we can give some pointers here for like what we can focus on a little bit.
Right. So just to put it into perspective, when Mark and I are working with clients a little behind the scenes, we do not usually bring in the pause on divorce conversation until a lot of groundwork has been laid.
Yeah.
And that's typically step 3, sometimes even step 4 of our process. And so there's steps that need to happen to get up to the point where your spouse would even be willing to pause on the divorce at all. And so that conversation doesn't happen right away. And we found that that's really important, that you need to lay that groundwork first, so they'll be in a place where they're ready and willing to. Kind of like with the drug addict, now they're ready and willing to, wanting to make changes themselves and wanting to work on things, right? Wanting to be healthier. So some of the things that would be needed here is balancing some responsibility, having some more clear agreements between you, and having those very much those cave conversations. So that's something that you can start with no matter where you are in your relationship. In fact, that's exactly where we start all of our clients with, because there's going to be things that you're talking about, even if it's over text or very little communication, but building in that empathy, that understanding, trying to understand their perspective, right, is part of the path process. Really knowing where they're coming from and making things feel a lot safer. The more safety you create in the relationship, this is going to start to bring in more trust. It's going to start to help your spouse recognize the changes that you're making and know that they're real, and start to actually believe them. So that's what we really focus with you on step 1 and 2, is how do you help them see you for who you really are? And the home message, right? I'm not going to go deep into that. If you want home messages, more training on that, just type home messages in the chat. We'll send you full training on that. But this is really how you help them let go of that negative story, that negative addiction to divorce, so that they want to work on the relationship with you. And that's going to come a lot into clear agreements and backing up the message that you want to create about the relationship with consistent action. So that's kind of the recipe, is the positive story combined with consistent action equals spouse eventually believing the new narrative about the relationship and letting go of the addiction, letting go of the fear-based story, letting go of all the negative light that they're putting on you right now. So you can create that relationship together. What do you think, Mark? Let's go touch on a few other things that you're seeing here.
Sure. I like what you're saying. You're talking about balancing some responsibility, creating some clear agreements, creating safer conversations with like these cave principles. I think like a big piece here that's needed as we are trying to get someone to consider a solution beyond divorce is being able to go first and to demonstrate some of those clear avenues for solutions on your end. I think beyond like I think that's kind of where we start with a lot of the clients, and then we move towards balancing some of that out. But I do think that like as we encourage our clients to take this action first, to like start having or initiating some of these safer conversations, as they make bids for better empathy or better more consideration in their conversations, as they take the high road when there are arguments and they try to calm things down and try to help the other person feel understood, even if they're acting in an angry manner. This lays the groundwork for the ability to feel a greater sense of control over the situation. And that's not a terrible thing. Like we all want a little bit of control, a sense that we can have that impact within our relationships. We take it away, and that's what leads people to say, I don't have any hope. I don't know if I have enough control to move things in a good direction. So these are all the things that we are needing to instill in the relationship to lay that groundwork to feel better control in that relationship. So if we had to sum things up, I'm going to talk about like our takeaways from this. So I do feel like, I mean, we've stuck to this idea of divorce as a solution and why people feel that way. What's the takeaway? Like, what do we do with this? And how do we move on from this in general? Like, if we had to sum everything up.
I would say that bottom line is to seek some professional help. I do not recommend doing this on your own. Your relationship is too important to fail to get it right. At least if you're listening to this, I would think that assumption that your relationship is really important to you and you want to make sure that you get this right. Even as we're having these cave conversations, even as we're making clear agreements and we're demonstrating different solutions, do you know how to have that kind of conversation with your spouse? Are you really aware of all the patterns that you're in that might be self-sabotaging you and pushing your spouse further away? Oftentimes we're talking to people and you think that you're doing the right thing and you just have no idea that it's actually completely backfiring. So we just don't know what we don't know. And you cannot read the label when you're inside the bottle. So it really does take someone that knows here's how to have this cave conversation. Here's where I want you to show some increased empathy. Here's why I want you to encourage your spouse to have a little more responsibility and have a healthy boundary here. Here's where we need to put in a clear agreement. And this is the right time to do it. That all takes really knowing exactly how to do that, right? It takes expertise. And so I would encourage you to seek professional help to guide you in that process. Okay, there are improvements that you can make, but I can't see the comments live because I can't get on Facebook right now. Got to figure that out why, or whatever why, but I will be watching your comments later. But I can imagine some of you are saying, oh, Heather, I am speaking nicer. I am listening more. I am trying to be more empathetic. I am working on myself. And she still doesn't want to do anything with me. That's exactly what we're talking about. And there's a reason why. So getting expert help to help you navigate those challenges, because more often than not, you might be applying a good solution, but it might be the wrong situation, or you just don't even know that the solution is for the problem that you're facing. You might not even know what the actual problem is. So encourage you to get that outside expert professional help to guide you through that process. And that's exactly what Mark and I do. So if you want more help from us, just leave a comment saying me, and we will reach out to you to show you how you can get a free breakthrough call with us, where we are going to read that label on your bottle, diagnose what's really going on in your relationship, and show you the exact treatment plan that you need to get to the result that you want. So that's above all what I would say. When I was going through cancer, I didn't just try to do it myself. If I did, that would have been disastrous. And to me, my health and my baby's health was too important to risk getting that wrong. So I went to one of the top experts in the world that knew how to diagnose the situation, how to treat it, and help me get to the result that I wanted. And so I would encourage you guys to handle your relationships with care. Know that you're not alone, but there are people like Marc and I, and if not us, then someone. Find some outside professional help to get you to the result that you want. Marc, what would you recommend here?
I think I would agree with what you just said there. And on top of that, I think a big purpose or a big reason to get some professional help would be to examine where your relationship has prevented some better solutions. If we're talking about, once again, divorce as a perceived solution, and that it's usually only considered when all other solutions have been shut down, if you're trying to walk away from that, you do need to see where those solutions were shut down. And you do need to take some time to figure out, how do I reverse some of that damage? How do I do things differently? I think in large part, as we are trying to convince someone to step away from divorce as the solution, there does need to be some demonstration that those patterns that brought the two of you to this point, there needs to be some ability to change them. There's lots of little things that can contribute to that. As we've been talking about, having safer conversations, these cave conversations, as we encourage Heather and I, as we encourage our clients to act first and to demonstrate some of the solutions that, that they're willing to do. I think a lot of these things help with this process. And I would also say that, above and beyond anything else, I do want to go back to what you said there, the overall statement that you made, Heather. You said seek professional help, because this is not a simple situation. If your spouse is considering divorce, if they've maybe talked about putting the papers in, or if they put the papers in already, this is like a level 10 crisis that you should not go about just watching YouTube videos and reading self-help books in order to try to get some solutions. This is not that situation. That's an inappropriate response, and you need to figure out how you can make professional support work in your life if you really want things to be able to turn around here. I can't emphasize that enough. I know I'm doubling down on what you said there, Heather, but I can't agree with that more. So if we just kind of if I just had to list some things off, I would say seek professional help, examine where your relationship has prevented better solutions, certainly make some changes to those patterns, create safer conversations, like by injecting some of those CAVE principles, and make sure that you are going first and demonstrate some solutions. I think are all good things to consider.
Awesome. I agree. So if you would love for your spouse to break their addiction with divorce, type break the addiction below, and we'll make sure we reach out to you, have a private conversation on Facebook, YouTube, wherever you're commenting, and make sure you get those solutions right away to move things forward in your relationship. We have now seen thousands of people just like you whose spouses were dead set on divorce. They were completely addicted to this idea of divorce, to turn things around. And so we know that there's absolutely hope for you as well when you are committed, coachable, and dedicated to doing what it takes to get there. Now, our marriage myth buster is reconciliation is solely the responsible of the person who still wants the relationship. All right. Now this one's kind of funny to me because I think I probably said it online on YouTube in a podcast to our clients so many times that you can save your marriage on your own. And that if you want to, and you're the one willing to, it kind of has to start with you. So Marc, what might be a little bit more clarity that we could bring to this myth or discussion around it?
Yeah. So I think in a lot of these discussions here, why people make these statements is because there is some hint of truth in this. I mean, even like you said, one of our claims that we make here is that you can save your relationship on your own. And so, like, to say that reconciliation is only the responsibility of the person who still wants the relationship, even makes sense. Like, why would someone who wants out, why should we place any responsibility on them to fix things? It doesn't make sense. So, like I said, this is a difficult, myth to discuss. On the one hand, if someone states that they're done with the relationship, generally means they no longer want any responsibility over fixing things. And on the other hand, nearly all relationship problems have some roots with each partner. In other words, I don't think there are very many problems. There's very, very few problems where 100% of the contribution is solely on one partner. So even for something as one-sided as an affair, we'll take this as an example. Yes, the cheating partner is responsible for their choices. I'm not going to place any responsibility for the fact that someone chose to commit adultery. I'm not going to put any responsibility on the other partner. But that other partner very likely did contribute in some ways to some of the problems that led to the affair. Has there been some neglect of the relationship? Has there been some shutting down of some needs? Have the two partners been drifting apart? And this isn't any attempt to blame victims by any means. It's an attempt to say that even though reconciliation may only be desired by one partner, there is some amount of ownership that each partner has around the relationship in all cases. And there does come a point where there's different points in the reconciliation process sometimes where one person takes on the majority of the responsibility, and eventually we do need to balance that out. So if we're coming back to this idea of one partner taking responsibility for reconciliation, I think that's like a great place to start. I'm going to reiterate that, to start. And eventually, there's a lot that one person can do to prepare the way and to set things up for success. And eventually, we do need to have that person who has started, we need to have some balance there. There's a lot of good ways to go about that, but one of the things that we strive to do within our program with High Thrive is to prepare a relationship to get to that point where we can balance out accountability and responsibility. Even though one partner might be reluctant to take that responsibility, one of the things I think we do really well here is we support our clients in setting things up and having those difficult conversations in such a way as to give the best chance for success. So my thought here is, if you feel like your partner wants out and you're struggling because they haven't taken any responsibility for the relationship, we encourage you to come to talk with us. We, just might have some solutions that you haven't considered. And still, I'm not even sure if this really answers the myth, so to speak, but I want to recognize that even if your partner may not want to take responsibility or ownership over the fixing of the relationship, at some point, we do need to have that discussion, and we do need to place that responsibility on them if you are trying to reconcile. I get a sense of a little bit of this catch-22-ness, like we need to place that responsibility on them. We need to have them be accountable. And there's a whole lot of discussion that needs to be around that interaction. But yeah, like I'm going to reiterate what I said at the beginning. This is a difficult myth to discuss in terms of where it comes from, how do we handle this and all of that. But suffice it to say, this is where we sit within our program all the time. And this podcast is an attempt over hundreds now of episodes to describe this very situation and to help support this very situation here. If you get what I mean.
Exactly. My
Yeah.
2 cents is that it's so custom to you and in exactly your relationship. For many, it's really going to be one-sided for a while. Like Marc said, you really do have to start by doing it on your own and being willing to shoulder the responsibility of saving the relationship, doing the work, even when you get very, very little positive feedback at the beginning. Okay. Because that's just what's required if your spouse has already checked out. Anything else would be like ludicrous to think that they're going to come around when they already went out. It just doesn't even make any kind of sense. And pushing for them or demanding that they do it is going to backfire. We already know that. But then there are some instances where we do instantly bring your partner into greater accountability and responsibility, depending on the situation, depending on what the behaviors are. And so it really is completely custom. But like Marc said, eventually all relationships, in order to be fully reconciled and to be fully healthy, are going to have both partners taking responsibility and taking accountability, creating the relationship, working on it together. The timing of that is going to be very specific to you and where you are at. So thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you, Marc, as always. And next week, we're going to share with you our marriage revival blueprint. We're going to show you how to transform conflict into connection. If you and your spouse have a lot of conflict and tension right now, then this is definitely going to be for you. So make sure you stay tuned. Thank you guys for joining, and we'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, bro.
Thanks for listening to The Thriving Marriage, your A to Z blueprint for not just surviving marriage, but thriving. Until next time, my friends, thrive on.